Alright, so after an awesome semester in Comms 411, I decided for my project I was going to do the Escalation of Violence in the Dark Knight trilogy. And I decided to do this because I'd actually never really seen the Dark Knight trilogy. I'd seen like bits and pieces that like I kind of remembered when I was younger, but I didn't remember like the plot or anything. I didn't even remember that Christian Bale was in it. So I decided to watch it in its entirety, and I decided to break up my analyzing of the violence into a couple categories. So I decided to analyze the number of different weapons featured in the movie, the amount of deaths, the kinds of deaths, and the different parent ratings on IMDb. And so I decided to use those to really kind of show by numbers how violent each movie was. So, in the first movie, Batman Begins. That's a really horrible quality photo, but we keep going. So, the different weapons in this movie, there weren't as many as in the other movies, but I found a list over here. If you can see, it has all the different kinds of weapons that were featured in the movie. There are 15 different rifles and shotguns, 9 automatic slash semi-automatic, and there's not really as many like specialty weapons per se, besides like the poison that they use and things like that. But 39 of the on-screen deaths happen without any guns at all, including through the explosion at the League of Shadows, pushed up of high buildings, all that kind of stuff. And so that kind of set it aside from the other movies, I would say. As you can see, 34 of the kills happened through the crash and explosion at the beginning of the movie. And only 6 deaths were shown directly killed at the hands of others. So what I mean by that is that, like, you see someone either go up to them, shoot them, or go up to them, strangle them, whatever. Like, you see the cause and effect kind of deal. Whereas with, like, the explosion more, it's like, oh, he did all these things, and then you see later when he's not near them what happens kind of deal. And then for this one, the IMDb rating was violence and gore. For that one was 21. And I wonder if it's because of the Scarecrow or anything like that. I thought that was a scary character, but most of the scenes were more fighting and less like violent, like graphic or gory or anything, but that's my personal opinion. And then they rated it a 7 on the frightening and intense scenes. They included the poison and when his house burns down and the Scarecrow himself, just because those were all pretty frightening things if you were a kid. So, in total, the amount of deaths in this movie, or kill count, people that were murdered kind of deal, was 43. And then we move on to The Dark Knight. This one I feel like is the most famous one, so I was excited to watch this one. I'd seen like parts and seen obviously Heath Ledger and stuff like that, but I had never really watched this movie. So there were 30 different kinds of pistols, revolvers, rifles, shotguns in this movie. 10 different semi-automatic weapons, 7 different specialty weapons, including the Batmobile, the pod, Joker's grenades, flamethrowers, etc. And only 12 of the deaths in the movie were from guns. And as you can see from this list over here, there's a lot bigger of a variety of weapons and the different things used within the movie. So in this one, 38 deaths happened from explosions, car crashes, things like that. Some of the more violent ways that people died were without guns, honestly, like the pencil being slammed in the eye. I'll really have quite a core memory of that because that freaked me out. Someone was hung. It was alluded to that the Joker was gonna slice a smile into somebody's mouth. So 17 deaths in this movie were shown directly at the hands of others, where you see cause effect, person to person kind of murder. And the IMDb rating for this one has 16 instances of violence and gore and 14 instances of frightening and intense scenes. And you can see some of the examples I have there. And though the ratio is kind of different in this one than the other one, I think the amount, how they're equal, kind of shows how the movie itself is kind of a little bit more intense. The amount of people killed in this movie was 66, which 43 to 66 is quite a big jump. But definitely not as much as I honestly thought there would be. And the final movie is The Dark Knight Rises. This movie was not what I expected at all. This movie honestly was a lot darker and a lot scarier than I anticipated it to be as a 23-year-old girl. So, you can see in these ones, a lot of the weapons in this movie have like upgraded and just kind of skipped the small things like handguns, pistols, shotguns, and rifles. There's only 12 different ones of those, but 23 different semi-automatic guns. And there's 4 specialty weapons, including the bat pod and the tumbler weapons that patrol the city. And in this movie, you can see the deaths by guns goes up astronomically. And so, at least for me, the presence of those type of weapons kind of made it a lot more real for me, even though it was still kind of like an outlandish concept. Like, it still was a lot more real to me when there's less futuristic kind of crazy weapons and more kind of like the weapons that are out in the world today. And so the on-screen deaths, you see 45 people die in the explosions and the crashes and stuff. As you can see, an entire football team died or whatever. And there's people that drown. And Bane himself is probably one of the most violent characters in the franchise. He breaks people's necks. You see him strangling someone. He literally drop kicks Batman. And in this one, you can see 37 deaths at the direct hands of others, where you see the people shot right there in front of you versus like seeing people who were shot. So this one has 20 instances of violence and gore that they picked out. And I thought it was interesting that they included the phrase that it was an intense fight. It had intense fight scenes for a PG-13 movie. And I think that's true. The fighting in the first movie and this movie were definitely drastically different, where you see a lot more pain, you see a lot more, I don't know, like more intensity between the fighting. And the frightening and intense moments, including like Gotham was on the verge of destruction, kind of like a Purge-like scenario, where that's a rated R movie, you know, like that whole like scenario was like very scary. Bane as a whole freaked me out as a child. I genuinely wouldn't see the movie because of it. And so just those things kind of add to the frightening and intensity of the movie. And so the amount of people killed in this movie goes up by quite a bit from the others. It's 124 people. And those are the people that we know of that get killed versus people that are in the crosshairs or whatever. 124 people are alluded to being killed or are murdered, or we see their dead bodies, whatever. So I thought it would be interesting to see the deaths in each movie kind of on a graph, and you kind of see how much that changes in between these two. It's kind of like steady, and then it kind of goes up drastically. And then you can see the different explosions in the movie. It goes up, but it's not by like anything crazy, I feel like. And then you can see the causes of death by movie, kind of like these are the total deaths, and you can see I put deaths by explosions, but whatever, anything besides guns. And you can kind of see that these movies that I feel like were maybe a little less violent have less deaths, but also just a smaller ratio. And these ones have almost an equal ratio of guns to other circumstances. And then this one, you can see the different ratios of weapons in the movies. As you can see, The Dark Knight has a lot of kind of handguns, that kind of thing, versus the Dark Knight Rises has more automatic, semi-automatic. I feel like that really made the movie kind of like more helpless and more intense because they had those, versus in this one, it kind of felt like a toss-up in between the forces of good and evil because they were kind of on the same playing field. And here is the IMDb violence and gore rating. I honestly don't know why they rated Batman Begins so high. I wonder if it's just because maybe it was like the first one, or I don't know, like maybe they have to have a certain amount on each one. I don't really know. But so I thought that was interesting. Maybe just because this one was more futuristic, The Dark Knight itself, just with the Joker and stuff. I don't know. And the IMDb frightening and intense rating, I feel like is accurate. Except I would probably switch The Dark Knight Rises and Batman Begins. I don't know, they all were kind of intense, but The Dark Knight is definitely kind of the scariest, most intense one for me, just because the Joker himself is such a frightening character. And though this is like not like the most effective way of showing it, I just kind of wanted to combine all the information that I gathered into one cohesive bar graph for each movie. And so you can see that obviously they, with all the factors that I rated, it would be The Dark Knight The Dark Knight Rises as the most intense one, but I honestly think they were all kind of a cohesive trilogy where all the movies were kind of equal in intensity in just different ways. And so that's my last slide, and what I realized while doing this project is how much more goes into a violent movie or intense movie than I realized by the different aspects that add to the violence. And it really opened my eyes into what I really think adds to the violence in a movie.